And then the people would start inviting us to come to their churches, and sing, would also sing with me. This is how we kind of got our start.
Shirley Caesar spent more than 70 years being called the Queen of Gospel, and her voice lifted millions inside churches across the country. But behind the songs and the standing ovations sat a quieter pain she rarely let people see. In July 2014, she lost the man she had stood beside in ministry for 31 long years, and the funeral was only the beginning of the story. What followed inside her own family was something no one outside that house could have imagined.
I'm the last of 12.
You're the last of 12, like living.
Yeah, but I thank God I'm still here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
There were arguments over money, ministry property, and stepchildren who allegedly turned cold. The truth is genuinely heartbreaking. Shirley Caesar was born on October 13, 1938, in Durham, North Carolina, in a crowded wooden house near Tin City, a black working-class neighborhood shaped by the tobacco industry. She was the 10th of either 12 or 13 children, depending on which family memory you follow, and that small difference never changed the larger truth of her childhood. The house was full, money was tight, and every meal depended on wages earned the hard way. Her father, James Big Jim Caesar, spent his days doing long shifts as a tobacco laborer, then gave his nights to gospel music. He would come home with his hands marked by curing leaves and his clothes carrying the smell of the warehouses. And in that world, Shirley learned very early that music and survival could live in the same room. That lesson deepened because Big Jim was not simply a church singer. He led a local gospel quartet called the Just Come Four, sometimes announced as the Just Came Four, and he carried the lead while the other voices answered behind him in close harmony. Their sound pulled from the spiritual quartet tradition, but it also had the pulse of Durham in it. Churches shook with it. Small halls filled with it. Wooden floors answered back to it. Shirley sat close and watched everything. She noticed how her father lifted his left hand to guide the group, how a hymn could be pushed into a stronger rhythm, and how a crowd could move from stillness into clapping and release. Before anyone trusted her with a line of her own, she was already learning how a song could hold a room. That training started paying off almost immediately. By the time she was around 5 years old, she was already appearing on church programs across North and South Carolina as Baby Shirley. Promoters wrote the name on handmade flyers and cardboard signs outside wooden sanctuaries. She rode for hours in shaky cars to sing one song at a Tuesday night service. And when the program ended, she might pass the collection plate and leave with a few coins or a crumpled dollar in her hand. Her voice stood out because it was high, sharp, and slightly rough around the edges, which gave it a force people remembered. In churches where most singers were grown women, that child voice felt fresh and startling. Soon, pastors were inviting that little Caesar girl weeks ahead of time because her name alone could fill benches with farmhands, maids, and mill workers waiting to hear something new. Then childhood shifted. Sometime between 1945 and 1950, when Shirley was around 10 or 12, her father died suddenly from a brain seizure. The exact age changes from one account to another, but the pain at the center of the story does not move. For years, she believed, with the kind of guilt a child can carry too easily, that his seizure came after he whipped her for breaking streetlights that same day. She would later speak about that memory with tears. Once Big Jim was gone, the family lost far more than a father. They lost balance. Her mother, Hallie, often called Hannah, was already in fragile health, and now she had to manage a house full of children with almost no money coming in. So Shirley was pushed out of childhood sooner than she should have been. She cooked, she cleaned, She bathed her mother. She stayed in school. Then, in the evenings, she sang in nearby churches and handed over nearly every coin she earned, sometimes enough to buy only a little milk, because the younger children still had to eat. That pressure might have crushed somebody else, but for Shirley, it became part of the making of her. Soon after her father's death, she began traveling with a one-legged evangelist named Leroy Johnson, a preacher who moved through the Jim Crow South, holding tent revivals and turning his own hardship into part of his message. By about 12, Shirley had become his featured child soloist. She sang beneath canvas tents in small Carolina towns, and she even appeared on his television show based in Portsmouth, Virginia, which was rare ground for a black gospel act in the early 1950s. The work was hard. She rode segregated buses through the night, slept in terminals between stops, came home exhausted, ate a bologna sandwich, handed Johnson's love offerings and television money to her mother, and went straight back to school. That was her life for a while. She was a touring artist and a dutiful daughter at the same time, carrying both roles before she was old enough to fully understand what that cost. Even as that burden grew, music kept opening doors. In November 1951, Federal Records brought baby Shirley into the studio to record her first single, "I'd Rather Have Jesus," backed with "I Know Jesus Will Save." She had been born in 1938, which meant she was actually 13 when she recorded it, though the label advertised her as a 12-year-old lass to sharpen the child prodigy image. It was only a one-year change on paper, yet it helped build the idea that this was not simply a talented girl, but something close to a wonder. The music world knew how to sell a story, and Shirley was beginning to live inside one. For a while, though, she still imagined a more ordinary future. After graduating from Hillside High School in Durham in 1956, she enrolled at North Carolina College, now North Carolina Central University, and chose business education as her major. She was around 18 and seemed to be reaching toward stability, the kind of life that could lead to teaching or office work rather than endless miles on the gospel circuit. On weekdays, she was a student walking through campus life. On weekends, she was still the young singer church audiences already knew. Those two paths sat side by side for a while, and she tried to carry both. Then one moment changed how she understood her future. Around 1957, during a routine typing test in class, Shirley later said she heard the voice of the Lord speak to her. She was about 19, her fingers moving through a timed exercise, when she felt with full certainty that the classroom was not where her life would end. The test was supposed to measure skill. Instead, it became a spiritual turning point. From there on, school no longer felt like the final destination. The calling she had sensed since childhood became harder to ignore, and every next step started to feel as though it had to answer that voice. Soon after, that came the moment that changed her career in a very visible way. When Albertina Walker's Caravans came through North Carolina around 1957 or 1958, Shirley went as a fan. Somewhere during the event, she wrote a bold note on a scrap of paper asking the MC to call Shirley Caesar up for a solo. The message reached the stage. The announcer read it. Then her name was called. She went up and sang Thomas A. Dorsey's "The Lord Will Make a Way Somehow," with such force that Albertina Walker reportedly turned to someone nearby and said she wanted that little girl. What started as one risky note in a crowded room opened the next chapter of her life. In 1958, when she was about 19, Walker followed up and asked Shirley to join the Caravans. Shirley said yes, with her family's blessing, and left college to move into full-time gospel work. She joined one of the strongest female gospel groups in America and entered a lineup packed with major talent, including Albertina Walker, Inez Andrews, Cassietta George, Dorothy Norwood, Dolores Washington, and James Cleveland in the broader orbit of that sound. For Shirley, this was not just a chance to sing with stars, it was a training ground. She had the voice, but now she had to learn how to hold an audience on a national stage. That education happened fast. Within the Caravans, her style began to stand apart because she did more than sing the notes. She leaned into what people later described as a sermonized style. On "He Never Left Me Alone," recorded on December 30th, 1958, for Savoy's album Mary, Don't You Weep, she led the track and stretched spoken lines through the song in a way that felt like a preacher opening up a message. In songs such as "I'm Going Through" and "No Coward Soldier," she began easing into the story before the full music took over. Even a 1961 solo single, "Hallelujah, It's Done," included a recorded sermon, showing that her identity as a singing evangelist was already taking shape while she was still part of the group. The road taught her the rest. After leaving North Carolina in 1958, she entered the Caravans world of travel, rehearsals, church programs, revivals, and endless movement through the segregated South. Some accounts describe the group performing more than 300 church concerts and programs in a year. That kind of schedule turned every week into a test of endurance. She learned how to pace a long set, how to read a room, how to cue musicians with a glance, and how to understand offerings and ticket sales, because survival in gospel music depended on more than talent. Chicago gave her a base, but the real classroom was the road itself. Even so, the money rarely matched the labor. From 1958 to 1966, the Caravans drew strong crowds, but black female gospel groups were still paid far less than white counterparts on similar programs. Some accounts say white gospel quartets could earn around $800 for a show, while the Caravans received about $150. By the middle of the 1960s, Shirley, even as a featured voice, was reportedly making around $75 a week, while some men on the same circuit earned much more. She would later say that once she went solo, she made more in a few months than she had during her entire 8 years with the Caravans. That memory stayed with her because it revealed both the limits of the system and the size of what she carried inside her. By 1966, she was ready to step out on her own. After 8 years with the Caravans, Shirley Caesar left the group, formed the Caesar Singers, signed with Hobb Records, and began using the name Evangelist Shirley Caesar. That title mattered because it showed exactly how she wanted to be seen. Her first Hobb-era releases, including Ol Go in the late 1960s, made it clear she was no longer simply delivering songs. She was preaching inside them. She could sing hard, then move into spoken exhortation, call out sin, quote scripture, and rise back into improvised vocal lines that felt larger each time they returned. That blend of music and message became her signature. As her solo work spread, audiences began to understand that a Shirley Caesar performance did not unfold like a neat concert. She built her appearances more like revival services. There might be praise at the start, extended preaching in the middle of a song, then prayer or an altar call before the night was through. Testimonies could stretch the program. Her own speaking might deepen it further. 2 hours could pass, then 3. Yet people stayed because the experience felt whole. Sacred music, ministry, and public performance were all moving together now, and she knew how to make them connect. Recognition followed. Her early solo momentum surged when she won her first Grammy for "Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man from Galilee," honored at the 1972 Grammy Awards. That song let her take a contemporary Christian hit and turn it into something fully shaped by her own style. She sang it, testified through it, and made it hers. That first Grammy opened the door to a long list of awards that would eventually place her among the most decorated figures in gospel music. Money improved quickly, too, and Shirley spoke openly about the difference. Within just a few months of going solo, she said she earned more than she had made in all her years with the Caravans. That shift came because she now stood at the center of her own career. She controlled bookings, she carried her own name, she benefited directly from offerings and record sales. The rise did not remove the memory of struggle, but it did prove that the voice, which had been shaped in crowded houses, church pews, tent meetings, and group tours, could now carry a full ministry on its own. As her fame grew through the late 1960s and 1970s, she tied that public success to concrete ministry work back home in North Carolina. Over time, she became the senior pastor of Mount Calvary Word of Faith Church in Raleigh, and spent decades building outreach through the Shirley Caesar Ministries. Her work reached into feeding programs, help for the poor and elderly, and support for people coming out of prison or treatment. That side of her life mattered because it showed how deeply she connected platform and purpose. The stage gave her reach, but ministry gave that reach direction. Then came one of the songs that pushed her into even wider recognition. In 1975, Shirley Caesar recorded No Charge, a piece that had first been written and recorded in country music by Harlan Howard and Melba Montgomery. Shirley turned it into something entirely shaped by her own gift. She did not just sing the story, she acted it out. The scene was simple and deeply familiar. A little boy brings his mother a handwritten bill for chores and asks to be paid. Then the mother responds with her own list, naming months of carrying him, nights without sleep, doctor visits, and love poured out without keeping score. Each line ends with no charge. In Shirley's hands, that domestic moment became a living sermon. She moved from conversation into song, then from song into soaring release, until a kitchen table felt like sacred ground. The record reached the R&B chart and even entered the Hot 100, giving her a rare crossover moment that brought gospel storytelling into pop space without losing its soul. Across the decades that followed, the honors kept building. She won multiple Grammys through the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and into 2000, and accumulated a shelf full of Dove Awards, Stellar Awards, and Lifetime Honors. By then, people were calling her the First Lady of Gospel and the Queen of Gospel Music. Those titles reflected the scale of her influence, yet the heart of her public identity still stayed close to ministry. Even when major institutions celebrated her achievements, she continued to be introduced not only as an artist, but as Pastor Shirley Caesar. Her journey also showed up in the places she was invited to stand. In October 1989, she became the first female gospel singer to perform at Harvard University's Memorial Church. In the 1990s, she appeared on major stages in New York, including work tied to Madison Square Garden and gospel theater productions. On April 14, 2015, she performed at the White House for The Gospel Tradition, in performance at the White House, singing Sweeping Through the City, before President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. That moment made clear just how far the road had carried her. The little girl from a packed wooden house near Tin City had become a national figure, yet the thread connecting every part of her story still held. In 1983, Shirley Caesar married Bishop Harold Thurser Williams, and that moment changed the shape of her life in a deep way. She was already a major gospel star with a powerful name in music, yet marriage brought her into another role that would stay with her for decades. She became co-pastor of Mount Calvary Holy Church in North Carolina, which later became Mount Calvary Word of Faith, and her world began to center around both the stage and the church. Music was still part of her calling, But now preaching, counseling, and serving people in the community became part of her daily life too. What makes that part of her story so striking is how naturally those worlds joined together. She did not step away from one life to begin another. She kept building both at once, and that gave her public image a different kind of strength. That same steady drive showed up in her education. Even with a full career, busy tours, and growing church responsibilities, she kept pushing herself to learn more. In the mid-1980s, she earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Shaw University, with one account placing it in 1984. And later, she also attended Duke University Divinity School. That detail matters because it reveals something solid about her character. She was not living on talent alone. She had already left college earlier in life to follow music, so coming back later and finishing a degree says a lot about her discipline. By that point, she was already famous, already working, already carrying serious responsibility, and still she chose to return to the classroom. As the years moved on, her role in ministry grew even larger. Around 1990, she was ordained as pastor by Bishop Williams, and in time she became senior pastor of Mount Calvary Word of Faith in Raleigh. That was a major shift in responsibility. She was no longer simply a celebrated singer who could move a crowd and inspire a church. She became the person helping guide the whole ministry. Preaching, leadership, oversight, and care for the congregation all rested more heavily on her shoulders. Even so, she carried those duties while staying active in gospel music, which is part of what made her life stand out. She did not leave the sanctuary for the spotlight, and she did not leave the spotlight for the sanctuary. She carried both callings together and made them feel like one long mission. Then her story took another turn that few people would expect from a gospel legend. She also served on the Durham City Council for about 4 years. She explained that she wanted to be a spokesperson for people in need, and that choice gave her life another layer. She was not satisfied with speaking about struggle only from a pulpit. She stepped into public office and tried to help people through local government too. That move gave her story real weight because it showed action, not just words. It also made clear that her concern for people was not limited to church walls. She wanted to be present where decisions were made and where people's daily lives could be affected in practical ways. That same spirit runs through her outreach work, which is one of the strongest parts of her story. Her ministry gave people food, clothing, shelter, and help with rent and utility bills. Some accounts say she gave back 50% of her road earnings to support people in need. And another says she began outreach work as early as 1969. Later reports describe yearly giveaway events with food, toys, and clothing for families. When you put all of that together, the picture becomes clear. She was not simply singing about faith, sacrifice, and compassion. She was putting her money, energy, and time into the lives of other people. That kind of giving changes the way a public figure is remembered because it tells you what mattered to them when the cameras were not the main focus. Then, decades into that long career, something happened that pulled Shirley Caesar into a completely different kind of spotlight. In November 2016, a short 28-second loop from her 1988 sermon song, Hold My Mule, exploded online as part of the You Name It challenge. The clip centered on her fast line about beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, and suddenly, a gospel performance from years earlier was racing across Twitter, Instagram, and Vine. By Thanksgiving week, millions of people were posting videos, and DJs were turning that one moment into full remixes with a trap sound. For a new generation, Shirley Caesar was no longer only a gospel icon from church and records. She had become part of internet culture almost overnight. At first, she received that moment with good humor. She said she was grateful that younger people were finding a message that had been out in the world for decades. In one sense, the viral wave gave her name fresh attention at exactly the time the Recording Academy was preparing to honor her with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2017 Special Merit Awards ceremony. Yet the mood around the trend changed as more clips appeared. Many people began pairing her line with twerking, revealing club clothes and bottles of alcohol. And that pushed the meme far away from the spirit of the original performance. Shirley Caesar made it clear that Hold My Mule had come from a message about a man praising God for his farm. For her, it carried meaning, testimony, and worship. So when the joke drifted into a style that clashed with her life as a pastor and gospel pioneer, she felt the difference sharply. That tension soon became a legal battle. By December 2016, she had filed action in Gwinnett County, Georgia, against DJ Suede, Julian Booth, and Empire Distribution. Her team argued that they had released and sold a commercial You Name It track on iTunes without written permission, and they said this continued even after requests to take it down. Reports said she was seeking at least $5 million in losses linked to the unauthorized song and the visuals built around it. The dispute was about more than one remix. For her, it was about control over her name, her ministry, and the image she had spent a lifetime building. What had started as a burst of online fun had now turned into a fight over ownership, reputation, and respect. At the same time, internet gossip began to crowd around her name. YouTube channels started posting videos with scandal language, including vague talk about sexuality and supposed hidden secrets. These clips often leaned on old photos, fan stories, and dramatic voiceovers instead of verified records or serious reporting. Still, once that kind of content enters the online world, it spreads fast. For many viewers, real news, legal coverage, and baseless rumor begin to blur together on the same screen. That is part of what made the period so difficult. Shirley Caesar was being honored for her lifetime of work, while internet culture was also reducing her name to memes, gossip, and speculation. Her story during that time also reveals a larger truth about the pressure placed on Black women in ministry. Shirley Caesar was not just a singer with hit records, she was a Black female pastor whose career stretched back to the 1950s, long before social media could turn a sermon into a joke in a matter of hours. So every viral moment carried extra weight. A gospel legend with a pulpit was expected to be graceful, funny, serious, careful, warm, and strong all at once. When she defended her image, some people treated that as part of the drama too. In that kind of climate, fame becomes complicated. The same moment that brings praise can also open the door to ridicule, distortion, and constant public watching. Then life brought her an even deeper private pain. On July 4, 2014, Bishop Harold Ivory Williams died at the age of 81 after more than 3 decades of marriage and shared ministry with Shirley Caesar at Mount Calvary Word of Faith in Raleigh, North Carolina. They had married in 1983, so by the time of his death, she had lost not only a husband, but a 31-year partner in ministry, leadership, and daily life. She later described coming home to an empty house as the hardest part. After the funeral, she said she fell apart emotionally. Sleep became difficult, the pulpit became painful, and church members remembered how hard it was for her to speak about him without breaking down. Even so, she kept going. She kept showing up. She kept preaching through the grief while carrying a loss that touched every part of her life. That sorrow was followed by tension over his estate. Reports online describe a long and bitter fight involving some of her stepchildren, with arguments over money, homes, ministry property, and control connected to the church and other assets in North Carolina. According to those accounts, private family talks gradually turned cold and strained. Questions about inheritance and authority became personal, and what should have been a season of mourning became wrapped in conflict. For Shirley Caesar, that must have felt especially painful, because the challenge was coming from inside the family circle at the very moment she was already trying to stand back up emotionally. Some of the most painful claims went even further. Certain commentary videos and long-form tributes say that relatives accused her of using their mother's pain for fame, suggesting that stories of hardship in songs, sermons, and public testimony had turned family suffering into material for ministry and public image. Whether people agree with that view or not, the accusation itself cuts deep, because testimony had always been central to how she preached and sang. For Shirley Caesar, turning pain into ministry was part of the work. So hearing that some relatives may have seen it through a much darker lens would have struck at the heart of her calling. In many ways, that heartbreak fits a pattern that reaches all the way back to her childhood. Shirley Caesar was born on October 13, 1938, in Durham, North Carolina, one of 12 or 13 children in a poor home led by her father, Jim Caesar, who was also a pastor. Around the age of 7, she watched him collapse and die from a brain seizure, and that moment is often described as the day her childhood changed forever. As a teenager, she helped care for her disabled mother, and even carried her on her back to church and appointments. Years later, after losing Bishop Williams, she once again faced the pain of losing someone central to her life. And once again, family struggle followed close behind. When you see those chapters together, her life begins to feel shaped by endurance as much as talent. That is why her words about forgiveness carry so much weight. After the Charleston Church massacre on June 17, 2015, she spoke openly about how hard forgiveness was for her. She said she found it very hard to forgive the young man responsible and struggled to understand how someone could sit through Bible study, receive kindness, and still kill 9 people. She explained that it took 2 full weeks and 2 Bible study cycles at Meet Calvary before she could honestly say she forgave him. She found strength in hearing one of the victim's relatives speak forgiveness in court, and that moment helped her move forward. What makes her reflection so powerful is its honesty. She did not present forgiveness as something quick or easy. She spoke of it as a real struggle, something she had to wrestle through with God, sometimes in tears, before she could stand up and preach it.